Barbara Peters from the Poison Pen, Scottsdale's Mystery Bookstore. This is another event in our ongoing criminal calendar, and our guest today is Philip R. Craig of Boston, and in the summers, Martha's Vineyard. Phil and I have been email pals, correspondents, sort of friends for a long time. And as you can see from the book display here on the table, which embraces his Martha's Vineyard Mystery Series, I actually collect Phil's books myself. And there's almost no higher compliment I can pay an author than that. Signed first editions. I will say that Phil's books do come out in paperback, but come out originally in hardcover editions, and that's something that we might chat about a little bit later, because that's not true of all people who write mystery fiction. Some only come out in hardcover, some only come out in paperback, some do the mix. Phil, you're from Durango, actually, or near Durango.
Grew up in a little cattle ranch 10 miles south of Durango. Yep, working cattle ranch.
Whereas I understand it, although we're only a few years apart in age, it seems, since I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, which was a little, I don't want to say more sophisticated, but had a few more amenities. You had neither hot and cold running water nor electricity, but you did have hot and cold running books.
That's true. My father was a cowpuncher. Went by covered wagon across the Great Divide in 1900 when he was 12 years old, and they homesteaded a bunch of land down there. One of those land rush situations where everybody lines up, shoot off a gun, and you charge out and stake out your 160. So that's how it all started. And then my mother was a school marm from way back east in Kansas. And she came out, and they ran into each other, and they married. And so we grew up on this little ranch that got sort of bigger as things were going on. And we had no electricity and an outhouse. And my mom, though, was a reader, and the house was always full of books. And so she used to read to us by lamplight. And I remember all five of us would be sort of scattered around, and the last thing before night, she'd read these books. And I fell in love with books really early, and I was fascinated by the idea that people actually wrote these things. And so maybe really early on it sort of occurred to me that I would be if not a writer, but someone who wanted to be a writer.
A life in books. I have to say, it was really unnerving when I first found this out about you. I wouldn't have imagined that a virtual contemporary of my own would have, had that situation as a child.
Well, it wasn't really uncommon out in, around this Arizona country. Anyway, time you get away from, Frank Lloyd Wright, in 1935, didn't have any electricity in Taliesin for a long time. So it wasn't unusual. I can still remember going to school 2 miles down the road. We'd either walk in good weather or ride horseback, or when it snowed, we'd put a sled, our old flexible flyer, at the end of a lariat rope, and put 2 kids on the horse and 2 kids on the sled, and we'd gallop to school. And so we always sort of looked forward to snowy days because it was a better than average way to get to school. But it was not unusual for farm people and ranch people like us not to have those amenities. And I can still remember watching the poles sort of march up this road to our ranch and past. And I remember the first time I walked into our living room, and there was a switch on the wall, and you click, and there was light. Magic.
Yeah, I've convicted myself of being a city slicker right here on television in Arizona. I can't stand it. But anyway, having learned to read at an early age, I understand that you became a passionate fan of Tarzan, and for a while were famous as the Tarzan Authority of La Plata County, Colorado.
Famous within my own mind, maybe, but yeah, I went to a one-room school for 8 years. All the ranch kids would come in from miles around, and they had a little one-room school. And looking back, I think, who was brave enough to teach this? But there were 8 rows of seats, and 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. And our library was a closet, and in the closet were a whole bunch of books that had been written around 1908, or they were incredibly outdated tomes even then. And one of them was a Tarzan book, and that really had a major effect on me because I'd gone to see Johnny Weissmuller movies, Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan. It never occurred to me there was actually a book about Tarzan. I was very excited. So I read this Tarzan book, and I ended up reading 24 Tarzan books. You know, for Christmas, my mom used to say, well, we didn't have much money, but one of the things each one of us got was a little stack of books. And we'd look in the old Sears roll book and Montgomery Ward catalogs, and we'd pour over it. And they actually sold all that kind of stuff in those days. Yeah, you could buy a barn in Montgomery Ward's.
So Edgar Rice Burroughs was
and
a
so
featured author?
He was the greatest author in the world as far as I was concerned, and I ended up reading over the next 2 or 3 years 24 Tarzan books. And I was thereby the Tarzan, most knowledgeable Tarzan expert in Southwest Colorado. That's
well, they probably gave you a keen sense of taste that you've translated into mystery fiction. So you went on eventually to Boston, and you earned an undergraduate degree in, what was it?
In philosophy and religion. When I was in Colorado, I belonged to a very conservative Southern Baptist church. And so I was going to become a minister. And but I was also, had been heavily influenced by Prince Valiant comic strips and
How do we take you as a serious writer when you're
Errol
telling us?
Flynn movies, and I swore that I was never going to go to college unless I learned how to fence. I always wanted to be a swordsperson, a fencer. And I was about to go to Bob Jones University and become a Southern Baptist minister, and I found out that Boston University had a fencing team, so I went to Boston University. And I was majoring in philosophy and religion with the intention of becoming a minister, and ended up majoring in fencing and minoring in bridge, and becoming interested in literature in a sort of a serious way. So by the time I had sort of changed my interests away from religion and philosophy and was really interested in writing and books, I had so many credits in religion and philosophy. I ended up majoring in it, but my interest in it became quite secondary by the time I got out of school.
And so you went on to a famous writer's workshop, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I don't think we've had a chance so far to discuss a writer who actually earns an MFA in writing prose.
Sure. To explain how I got there, I had to go back to my undergraduate career again. As I said, I really was majored in fencing, and fortunately I had wrecked a knee right at the end of my college career, so I couldn't continue, or I probably would have just kept on being a fencer. But meanwhile, at Boston University, I'd studied poetry with Robert Lowell. I took a course with him, and he rapidly persuaded me I had no future in that art form. So I'm sort of a failed poet. But I also studied under Gerald Warner Brace, who was an old-time New England sort of meat and potatoes author. And he liked my stuff. And as it turned out later on, the first novel I ever published, I published using his agent. The woman who was she came to his class one day. And so he said, well, if you ever write anything, send it to me. Maybe I'll sell it. And years later, I did exactly that. So that was my very first novel. But meanwhile, I was sort of out of school, and Cheryl and I got married, and I had no money and no prospects. And also, I was such a terrible student. You know, I had just ignored classes. And I still think the only reason they gave me a degree was to get me out of town. They said, you've been around here long enough. Go away. We'll give you this if you'll just leave. So I really didn't, I knew by that time that I knew what a bunch of things I didn't want to do. Obviously, I wasn't a business person. I just don't have what it takes and don't understand money. And I wanted to study something having to do with literature, and I heard about the Writers' Workshop in Iowa, which I later learned was considered a notable institution.
Absolutely.
I didn't know it.
It's a very highly respected.
Yeah, well, I found that out since, but at the time I thought, I had a friend who was going there, and I said, look, I'm looking for a graduate school, and I want to do some writing. He says, well, why don't you just take one of your stories and send it to Don Justice at Writers' Workshop? And I said, well, how about my academic record? It's terrible. I said, that doesn't make any difference. So I sent him this story, and they said, sure, come on. So I went.